So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. James Mitchell.
As always, the annual plan for the flow-through grant is required, and it's a formal agreement between the school division and the Virginia Department of Education. The funding is always contingent upon full approval of the plan from VDOE, and as Dr. Boone just stated, it was reviewed with SEAC on March 21st, 2017. The annual plan comes with the same requirements. As always, there's nothing much that has changed as it relates to the requirements. We still have the superintendent certification, the LEA policy assurances, which is making sure that we are following federal, state law, NPS policy and procedures. The local and regional jails agreement, we still educate students with disabilities in the Norfolk City Jail. And we did have one change to the MOU, and it was to remove the use of library services. It was removed because they don't have that. So that was just the only change to that MOU. The implementation narrative for 2015-2016 is pretty much saying that we do what we say we were going to do with this 2-year grant. And we did. We were able to update technology equipment for students with disabilities. We continued with working with our post-grad students by hiring 2 job coaches to continue to work in the summertime with What's Up Docs. The majority of the grant, as always, covers personnel with the number of teachers and paraprofessionals that we have. We were able to purchase instructional materials for Wilson Foundations, grades K through 1. And with those materials purchased, we also had training for a year. We will continue next year, whether it's on local, well, more than likely it will be on local. We will continue next year to provide professional development from Wilson in reference to Wilson Foundations for the teachers again.
And just for a reminder for the board, Wilson and Foundations are a supportive reading instruction for students with disabilities. When I was in Worcester, I also found it very effective with our non-disabled students as well as our ELL students. And so we've begun some conversations about, is this a direction we want to go district-wide, but we aren't there yet.
We, again, met maintenance of effort, meaning we were able to spend the amount of funds this school year as we did the previous year. The flow-through grant 611 contains the set-aside for private school students, and it contains the rest of the grant funding for NPS. We are requesting $8,143,666.13. That's what we're requesting. Until we get our award notice, again, that's what we're requesting, but it depends on our award. So the grant will be amended once we get that. The award usually comes in July.
If I may again, I try not to interrupt, but these are some pertinent points that I don't want to lose sight of as we go through. You know, as I've talked with the board around some of the uncertainty as it relates to federal funding, we know in the White House budget blueprint, it has special education at level funding. But what we don't know is the narrative behind that level funding and, you know, the story behind the numbers or the story behind the words is what we're waiting for. And so while we're projecting this based on our special education enrollment and per pupil allocation, this grant, along with all of our other title grants, title and entitlement grants, are really uncertain at this point. We know, and as I shared with the board, there are 2 opportunities for us to see impacts. I don't anticipate impacts on special education in the continuing resolution agreement, but we are bracing for impacts on the continuing resolution agreement, and that's what would take the government functioning from April 28th through September 30th. There's some notice that we've received Jamie has provided some information she received from the Council of Great City Schools. I received some information and others that some of our federal grants could be subject to reductions in this current fiscal year. And I note when Dr. James Mitchell indicated that there are a lot of positions in the grant. Again, this is what I've been trying to keep the board informed about, so we can understand anything that doesn't occur with the federal grants. We're going to have to make some strategic decisions about positions not funded or not continued through grants. So while we were on this page, I wanted to share that.
So the grant, again, primarily covers full-time positions, as Dr. Boone stated. 1 administrative, 3 clerical, 110 paraprofessionals, a teacher specialist, and 59 teachers. The grant this time is pretty much only for salary and nothing else. It does not include a pay raise or anything from the study that was completed this year.
Let me just ask a quick question based on that last point. So it was a pay and comp study to get people on steps.
Yes, ma'am.
Not a pay raise. So are you saying that none of these people will get put on their proper step?
No,
No.
it is not included in this
Right.
amount.
Once again, because this is one of those challenges we're facing with grants, some of that structural piece. The total budget amount at this point does not reflect what the movement on steps would be.
Okay, thank you.
So grants have to pay for those themselves. So any position that's in a grant has to absorb that. And so that was part of our challenge last year with the 2.5% across the board. We had a difficult time meeting all of the goals that we had within grant applications, because if we met the salary piece, we had to make some other reductions within the grant.
Right, okay.
Again, I briefly talked about set aside for the private school students. For the last, I believe it's the last 2 years, we were offering speech language services and reading. This year, we will not be offering reading. We will revert back to speech language services only.
Or ESY? That's what.
Oh, no, for the private school students.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Parents will receive notice of that. We have to send them notice to see if they still want those services. And we will be letting them know we will not be offering reading services this year.
Well, what's required by law? Just the speech and language?
It's whatever the school division determines as appropriate. The majority of, I wouldn't even say majority, pretty much all school divisions just offer speech language therapy.
And we certainly look at the needs of the students who would be recipients of this. So I believe that there's some IEP matches to justify the speech language.
And we would reach more students
By just
with
doing
doing speech language therapy.
Can I ask a clarification question? Can you explain a little more private students, like who you're referring to? And
Oh, students who are in private schools such as St. Pius, if they come to, through our child find process.
Okay.
And they're determined that they're eligible for services, then we will provide them. If it's speech language, we will provide that, but if it's other services that we are not providing as a services, then they have to come to MPS and enroll as a student to receive everything that we would have to
everything
offer.
else? Okay, I just want to be clear that that's.
I just didn't realize that they had to come back and enroll if there were other services that were required through the IEP.
Yes.
Yes, that has been, ODARC 30, when I was a SPED director, we had to provide the services, and we determined where was the best placement. IDEA has been clearer now that
Okay.
the extension of services beyond a certain limit, and if a child needing extensive services in our provision can be adjusted to enrolling in the school district in order to receive the full complement of services.
That's going to be interesting to see with our new special ed, education person federally. It'll be To see how that works.
So preschool, 619. Last year, preschool had 3 teachers and 1 paraprofessional, I believe. This year, they will have 2 teachers and 1 paraprofessional on the grant. However, that 1 teacher has retired, which has freed up a great amount in the area of materials and supplies. However, they still needed that teacher. So I did have a vacant position on local that could carry that, so they could have the money that they needed to sustain them through the 2 years pretty much for that preschool grant. Any questions?
Are you finished completely, or?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm sorry. So I have a question. So I know we're talking about the flow-through, annual plan for the flow-through grant. Is this the same thing as the overarching special education annual plan that we talk about and review? Is this the same thing?
Yes, it's the.
Every year.
It's
plan,
the
the annual plan.
application,
Right.
it's the annual plan and application for certain funds.
So, so this document itself is representative of what we call our Norfolk Public Schools Special Education Annual Plan?
Per the
Yes.
state, yes. It's really financial.
Yeah, well, I guess
How
that's
they
what I'm
want to
trying
know how
to,
we're spending the grant.
well, I guess
and
that's what I'm
we
trying to
use it
understand. 'Cause I
for.
remember last year, we looked at progress monitoring, and we went through and we,
But that didn't have anything to do with the
Financial,
grant,
right.
the
but
financial piece.
that's what I'm trying to get.
That was the state performance reports that
Right,
we
understand
approved.
that,
That
but I'm
one
just-
it made, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, what I'm sensitive to, so we just went through the budget process and, we had some questions about the gifted plan. And I remember one of the speakers came and the speaker had the gifted plan and, which just resensitized me to the importance of what we have in our documents and what we approve. So I'm just trying to get an understanding that even while this deals with the financials, as we're dealing with this on the work session today, and I guess at some point would approve it, are we saying that this represents the breadth and scope of what we're calling Norfolk Public Schools Special Education Annual Plan for next school year?
What you're referencing, I'm not jumping in front, but I pulled it up based on your question, and since Dr. James Mitchell doesn't have her computer there. There's a superintendent certification that was, I think, the topic of the reference last year. And it says, and it's in the second document that was posted online also. But it says, for the purpose of implementing the provisions of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, I certify that throughout the period of the 2017-18 grant award, this school division will comply with requirements outlined in each of the following. Part B of the IDEA, including the eligibility requirements of Section 613. That means our process, you heard Dr. James Mitchell reference child find, that we identify, we assess, we identify, we evaluate, we do IEPs and the timelines associated with that. The second certification is that the IDEA federal implementing regulations dated October 2006, revised April 2007, and December 2008 are, again, those federal regs that come out and tell us these are the things that aren't negotiable and what you have to meet. And then the third bullet is Virginia's regulations governing special education programs for children with disabilities in Virginia and any revisions. So then it goes on to say the division has developed local policies and procedures for the provision of special ed services and related services which are kept current. And so this represents the procedures and the policies that the special education department utilizes through Child Find and the service provision of all students. So that is the reference, I think, to what you were saying about the annual plan and the policies. We certify that our eligibility process, our IEP process, meets all of the expected guidelines and that we keep those current as well as the service delivery models.
Right, so having said that, so if as a board, and as a governance team, we're trying to understand, discuss, update what we feel should be the policies, practices, priorities around special education delivery in Norfolk Public Schools, what document is it that we would reference to, let's say if we wanted to make some changes or have discussions around, what those services are, what those policies are, which document would that be?
It would be in the supplemental assurances that go along with this. So it would be the special education manual or documents that we use to train schools and others on what our process and procedures will be. And that includes parent notice, all of those pieces.
I'll come back in case others have some. Ms. Basine?
So in regard to this, I had a similar thought about, it doesn't have that comprehensive service and delivery that, like our gifted plan, so I had a similar question to that. But the other piece is, so how come, so the Wilson Foundations, there are 11 schools, I believe, that are
Yes.
indicated here. Is that in addition to, have we had schools prior to this year that already had it, or is this
There were some schools that had already purchased it.
had already purchased? So this is 11 now. Do all of them have it?
This year coming up is when we will phase in probably some more.
Okay.
But what we want to do is really to make it a 2-year process.
Okay.
When you look at teachers of students with disabilities, again, they're not content teachers. So with Wilson Foundations, it's really scripted. It works to, it helps them be able to teach the children to read. So with the first year, it was a learning process. What I really want to do for the second year is to really go into the implementation phase where they will probably feel much more comfortable after 2 years instead of phasing in another group of schools. But once the end of the year is completed, that's when we go back to the principals, look at the data to support exactly, do we need to go ahead and phase in the next group? Or do we need to go ahead and implement another full year of professional development for those 11 schools and
Okay.
those teachers?
So it's almost like a pilot of,
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
of doing that. Okay.
And
All
the
right.
training is very, very specific with Wilson.
Okay.
For a long time, I know, and I was refreshed of this, returning to the district, that we had just a few teachers that had been trained in Wilson, and that was pretty much what we were limiting our Wilson implementation to. We have made the decision that we want to expand that because we see the value added in the Wilson program. Going to the point about the data and the performance plan that you mentioned, Ms. Basine, how do we begin to make inroads in the reading of students with disabilities? And Wilson is something that we're leveraging to be able to show improvement in those for students and through those performance objectives.
Okay. And does Wilson also cover, because I know last spring, the dyslexia law was passed. Does Wilson also, because I know there's other models that are used for dyslexia, but Wilson doesn't cover that, does it?
Wilson can address a student who may have dyslexia. They can. And like you said, there are other forms. This is just the one that we choose because we know that research-based wise, this has shown growth with students with disabilities in reading.
Okay. Okay.
You had the floor, so.
Yeah, okay, so I have, so then on page 10 of the document that we have, about the coordinated early, yeah, on that document.
Let us, which
The coordinated-
The
actual-
PowerPoint?
No,
No,
of
the-
the,
blue
Actual
the actual
Okay.
plan, yeah. I was just curious that it's indicated that we do not have set aside funds for.
We are not required to. I have the memo, if you would like me to upload and email it to you. We received that from John Eisenberg stating that we do not, as a school division, have to set aside 15% for those early intervening services.
So
Right,
six-
but we can
619.
voluntarily, I thought. I
We
understood,
can.
Right?
We can.
So given our numbers, so we know what the positive impact can be of having those early intervention services on educational outcomes, like throughout their, educational career. Is it something that we ought to consider, or why wouldn't we consider it?
Well, I don't think we are saying we aren't going to provide the services because we don't do a 15% set aside.
Okay.
We are mandated to do child find and to support the programming. But in the example, in the information that Dr. James Mitchell provided, she said funding-wise, we had 3 teachers and 1 para, and 1 teacher retired, and so rather than absorb funds for a 3rd position, local funding is going to pick up the 3rd position. And I believe she was saying it allows us then to do some other programming pieces within that.
Within the preschool
619 is such a small grant that when you do the 15% set aside.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to share what we
When
do
you-
for early intervention?
When you look at, and it's coordinated early intervening services, and it's not for just preschool. And the data that they look at race data, the disability category, the placement data, and discipline data. And those are all the things that determine if maybe we need to focus on a particular disability category to determine if we need to set aside that 15% for that group. So when they analyze our data, it's supporting that, no, we don't have to do that. But like you said, we can.
But they would tell you you're required to
ma'am,
do
they
that
would.
if, okay,
Yep,
all right.
they would tell us.
And
Okay.
again, to Mr. Jordan's question, if there are adjustments that, SEAC has reviewed, but if there are adjustments that the board is asking us to make in the plan prior to final adoption at its business meeting later this month, then we will certainly accommodate the board's desires.
With the
Ms.
Wilson.
Wagner, hold on.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm
Dr.
sorry.
Gabriel.
On page 9 of the same document, perhaps you can help me understand the local funding versus the local plus the state funding. Local funding does not mean, is that local funding as in within the NPS budget?
Yes, ma'am.
And then the local plus state is
Funding.
NPS budget plus state funds? Does that also include grants or whatever?
It's all local. It wouldn't include the grant.
So no grants are considered with local and local plus state?
No.
Right, the local plus state, is that the SOQ add-on that we receive from state funding, or? I don't know,
Those are
maybe-
our expenditures,
Those,
right, Ms.
page
Well,
9, if you
yes,
can
it
go
is
to
expanded,
page
but-
9,
For local. State,
has a page number at the bottom, Ms.
it's not,
Banks.
it'll
Yeah.
have that's the right
Right,
page.
right there, right there. And so the question, Ms. Ingram, is the school year estimated projected, and those are for our actual expenditures, and then when we factor in, the question is, what does local plus state
Is,
equal?
right, and is the 11,000 number the amount that we spent estimated per student who was in special education?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then how does that compare to other school divisions regarding per pupil expenditure with regard to local funding, not the state funding, but the local funding?
Well, each school division has to meet maintenance of effort.
Okay,
So you determine this by the number of students that are in your December 1 child count,
okay,
minus any children who are residentially placed, such as the CSA, the NIC children, those type of children.
Okay.
It would be minus the December 1 child count, and then you would divide that number by the local funding or the local plus state funding to determine how much
Okay.
So if, like for Virginia Beach, for example, you know, they have probably double of what we have, so of course theirs will be different, you know, higher.
But their per pupil expenditure, when you do it per pupil wise.
You will see
is it
variation across districts.
variation,
It will not,
okay.
yeah.
So
So,
our maintenance of effort is that we pretty much can't fall below that $8,300 and per capita
Okay.
and consider it a maintenance of effort.
okay,
The local plus the state is the requirement showing that for students with disabilities, we are spending more in order to address, per student, in order to address the comprehensive needs of a student with disabilities. So that gives the example that we spend about $3,000 more per student with disability.
and that kind of falls along the lines of the other initiatives that Norfolk Public Schools, if it, offers gifted preschool, other things like that, where we don't necessarily have to offer some of those services, but it's a choice that is made by the division, because it's not 100% funded through the state.
It is a choice that we make in terms of addressing both school readiness for preschool and the holistic educational experience that students will have, so absolutely.
But this is this is, I guess, is this pre-K through 12
Yes.
per student?
Yes.
Okay.
Or that 21, 22 for
Well, right.
secondary.
You're right.
And with the preschool grant, what we do is, you know, we can always make budget transfers, and Dr. Tammy White, who is pretty much the one who uses this at Easton, she can determine where she would like to use the money as she goes through the year. She determines what the PD will be for the teachers, or she determines what instructional or supplies that the teachers need in PD.
I do a follow-on to that
Yep.
financial question.
And you have the floor after, continue.
Did we ask for more in this grant application than we did last year?
It was pretty much the same. It was pretty much the same.
Because
Pretty much the
they,
same.
the way the formula works, they give us an indication of what the federal guideline is per student. And so you go back to the other math where we divide it to create the per capita piece. We multiply that index, that dollar amount per number of students in the December 1st count minus those that Dr. James Mitchell indicated. And that pretty much sets the range. Now, until we get the funding authority through the federal government and that award letter that she mentioned, usually sometime in July, that's when we begin to recognize that we may be able to make amendments for, because we receive more money. In terms of my earlier comments, one of the things we see in the White House budget blueprint is level funding, and it's only at less than 40% of the amount that the federal government should be supporting special education. And so level funding for us could mean a loss of funding once all the dust settles around that. So that's why I was saying yesterday to council, it's a great opportunity for us to collaborate with our congressional delegation as it relates to these various grants.
And so do we spend more on special ed than through this application of $8 million as a division?
Oh, yes, because we
Right.
have the local budget as well. That's where maintenance of effort comes in. That's only on local, not on the grant. So yes, ma'am, we do spend more.
Okay. And then I think Mr. Jordan was going, this is a state-required grant application for special ed that basically we're required to submit that certifies that we're eligible and compliant to receive this funding.
Yes.
So it's not to belittle it, but it's kind of a check in the box so that we can get the appropriate funding. We say we're doing what we're doing,
Yes.
which is appropriate.
Which makes it an entitlement.
Exactly,
Grant.
which is totally appropriate. But I guess the bigger question is, where is the NPS vision of special education here in the division? And where is it that that strategy is laid out, that then is supported by funding like this and/or other local, or through other grants, that bolsters our special education programming?
Two thoughts on that. You will recall, I don't know, was it May, June, that we did a presentation on special education around that vision piece in terms of what we were doing and where our priorities are. And that's where we reported on the state performance indicators. and those that we were meeting and those that we weren't. And so to your question about how we use these funds, one deals with, of course, the teachers, because additional need for staffing, as well as the Wilson piece was part of the indicator that our students weren't meeting the state reading objectives, and parallels what's going on in the district with literacy. And that's why you see an investment here with the Wilson as an example of that big vision. In the school board's accountability plan, we talk about increasing the graduation rate of students with disabilities and their success on the various assessments, whether it's on grade level reading, SOLs, graduation, all of those things. And so those are the metrics around which we identify the vision for the district and moving in that frame. So we use that accountability plan to drive how we are moving and making progress toward expected goals.
I just wonder as a board if we need to look at that again.
Well, yeah, I mean, eventually,
Like to look at it
that's where I am.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of
That's where I am too, yeah.
talk through that. But I was get the questions out, then we can talk about that.
I would just want to go back to the Wilson, because some of the schools have had that for a while. Is there an upgraded portion of that did we replace
Well,
the upgraded part with some of the schools that
Well-
have been in the buildings for a while?
a very long time ago,
Right.
the school division received the funding called, what was it, ERA funding from the stimulus, all of that. So that was a lot of money that needed to be spent. One of the ways that the department used the funds was to train pretty much every teacher of a student with a disability. And so Wilson Materials has been around in the school division for a very long time, but then you had people who moved away or who didn't want to go through the process of the training. And so some schools did have some Wilson trainers left, certified trainers left, and some schools had the materials. So a lot of it was the Wilson reading versus the Wilson foundations. We tried to look at with Wilson foundations, early intervention when you look at reading. They need to be able to read then. Wilson reading, it was more along the lines for grades 2, 3, 4 in secondary schools. But again, we wanted the focus to be foundations, where we could have the teachers to teach the children to read. So there was some Wilson materials throughout the division previously.
So we pretty much have just started afresh with this.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And I think that my expectation and what we've talked about is moving beyond the training to true implementation of Wilson as a learning strategy for our students with disabilities who can show some of the greatest benefit from the Wilson Reading Program. And so training is one thing. The expectation that we utilize the training is the other piece. And so that's where we are really moving into the evidence that we're using Wilson to support the reading needs of students with disabilities.
I have two questions. So to get back to, so Wilson can be used for dyslexia, but given that it doesn't seem from my limited knowledge that it's the gold standard model to be used with that. And I'm wondering how that fits in with the law that's going to require new teachers to have that dyslexia awareness training for a licensure. Where does that fit into?
If I'm sure, I don't think that the school divisions are responsible for training the teachers with that. I thought that
Was pre-service. And so there are two thoughts. We're waiting for some more guidance, some
Yeah, 'cause
guidance
we
from
don't
the
know
state.
yet.
Because the way the bill
started
is,
this
written, it talks about teachers have, for licensure renewal
Right.
and for initial licensure, that they have training in the recognition and service delivery for dyslexia. It will certainly have implications for us as, just as I was saying about Wilson, when the state also expects transition from the training to evidence of supporting students in the classroom. Not every student with dyslexia is eligible for an IDEA.
Right.
So they could be served in a variety of settings.
And the second piece, to get back to what our strategic plan is around special ed, I have been curious about this, if the division has had a special education audit, or, I know Virginia Beach recently did one, and I wonder when Norfolk may have done one, would it be beneficial to do one? And this is not, you don't have to answer now, but could be something for a future conversation, future topic, if that's a direction that we want to go in.
I'd have to ask Dr. James
It had-
Mitchell, because not since I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Not since I've been director, so that's like 3.5 years, so. It might, when Dr. Anderson was here, or even when Kathy,
I'm not sure.
that was,
I don't know.
that.
So not
like
in a
decades.
while, yeah.
No, not in a while at all.
So, I guess,
I think it was Great City Schools that did it.
well,
Dr. Bill is nodding. Counselor,
Yeah, Council Great City Schools came in and did an audit for us.
do you remember which year?
I'm not sure, Dr. Joan
Wasn't it-
Spratley Anderson
Yeah, it was when
the director.
when she was the
at that
director.
time.
Long time ago.
Well, it is, but the IDEA regulations,
And she-
that probably would have been within the time that the regulations were in effect. And so we can certainly pull that and see,
yeah, I'd like
yeah,
to.
where we are. I
see
definitely
what-
will.
Yeah. And I think that would help us with our accountability too. I'm sorry.
See if there's a copy in the office.
We don't need it right now, but we
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
note the point. Ms. Wagner?
I did, the most recent audit they did at Booker T, that was not a special ed audit.
That was
That
not
was
for the
not.
purposes of IDEA and the other pieces, no. That was related to the schedule changes, because I'm not adopting the term recycling, because that's not what the process was. But that was in terms of one portion of service delivery, and that deals with whether or not the students with disabilities, we follow processes and procedures as it related to any schedule changes. And I will be updating the board during the business meeting later this month on where we are with that.
So let's kind of reset for a moment. So the plan that we have before us that we would like to put on the business meeting agenda for April in 2 weeks. This document is actually due when?
I believe it's May 2nd.
Okay, so first part of May. And then, so Dr. Boone, just kind of help guide us through this, because one of the things I was looking to try to figure out in terms of our overarching planning guidance, I went to the recent dyslexia forum that was had. I had met with folks before. Ms. Bassine had mentioned some of these bills, and and I looked at, even while we were in Denver, was trying to look at different sessions or talk to different school divisions around work that they were doing. And I wanted to figure out when was the appropriate time for us to talk about, our partnerships, our strategies, and some of the things that we've kind of teed up here. So can you just kind of guide us? Obviously it's not something apparently that's going to fit in this particular document, but as Ms. Doyle described, how do we, or when will we, or what's a good time for us then to really come back and reset and have a good feel as a board what our vision and direction is in terms of special education delivery in Norfolk Public Schools, and how our policies align with that. If they don't align with it, what do we need to update? But from our 5,000-foot level, how do we get a good sense of where we are with that and how these different activities either advance it exponentially or just continue to move us forward?
When the board talked about potential retreat topics. We landed on the specialty program for the initial one. I would, again, thinking about the list of topics, we can certainly prepare special education for a summer retreat topic and do the update both from what we did last May, June, as well as additional information that we may have around our progress through the year. We won't have all of our data in by then, but we can certainly talk about what are practices, what our implementation looks like for Wilson, what movement we're seeing in progress, and all of that. So I think it would be an appropriate time for us to consider that as a retreat topic for the next board retreat.
What, Ms. Basine?
So in line with that, I wonder what your thoughts are about this, because I think in the past, even gifted had fallen under special education at one point. Is that right?
Oh, no, that hasn't been
It's
made.
been for a while, but yeah.
I
it
mean,
did take
I said
place.
in the past,
In the
it had
past.
been.
Well, it wasn't like that when I left here, so if it moved, I wasn't aware of.
When you say fall under, you mean as far as what?
It used to
Like
be a
in so- in
Department
some-
of Exceptional
and it still
Children.
occurs in some states and districts. It's, special
About
education.
org chart.
What?
Are you talking
Right.
about org chart?
Yeah, like
Oh.
gifted education fell into.
There was an assistant director just for
Right.
gifted education in the special education department.
Okay.
Right. So, and given that, one thing, also having learned through conferences and talking with other districts, one subgroup within that are the twice exceptional that have IEPs and are also gifted. And trying to, knowing that we want to also have a discussion around gifted, is there a way, when we talk about the retreat or plan the retreat to,
So we had already identified gifted as a topic area. I don't know
Yes.
if you're suggesting that they be merged.
well, not merged, but if, not merged, but,
I took away from the last board conversation relative to gifted that we would do some type of review. And so I'm not quite sure what we'd be discussing other than what we know prior to some review as it relates to gifted.
Well, I'm just trying to follow Ms. Basine wherever she's going because,
well, I didn't know when, that might come up. So if that was a retreat topic and we want special education in there, I just want to be sure that we get that twice exceptional piece where they, students have IEPs and are identified.
Well, certainly, any student who is identified under IDEA as having a specific disability, that will be addressed. I think that right, the twice or triple exceptional child is something that we need to talk about in the overarching picture, but in relation to a special education presentation, it would be the assurance that a student who's identified as both gifted and having a disability, that the core supports are in place to address the disability. And then we can certainly make sure that that's one of our bridge areas in any review of our gifted programming, also to make sure that we're interfacing and integrating the services for both in a way that a child can maximize their potential.
Okay.
yeah, because I was just saying for me, when you speak to that, for me, that takes me down levels. I was just trying to make sure that at least at this level, we have some clarification and understanding as a board and a governance team, just where we are big picture in terms of our special education delivery strategy.
Right.
And whatever other things roll out from that, I mean, we'll get to.
Oh, I
so.
wasn't talking about, the deep down. When I said it was under, I just meant it used to fall under that umbrella, not.
So
Yeah,
then, so just from where I think we are
We're
there.
on the same page.
So in a couple of weeks, we're gonna be asked to vote on this plan. And Dr. Boone, you had mentioned earlier that there are some, if there are other supporting documents that this ties into, that can just be made available to us for review in anticipation of the vote, I think that would be helpful. But in terms of the big picture and just trying to get a sense of where we are today and where we're going to go tomorrow, I think the idea of working and getting that scheduled for a focused discussion for the team, I think is a good approach.
Certainly. We will talk and determine if there's additional information that would support understanding of what goes on. But this is our certification that we will follow the rules so that in lieu of these funds. And we don't have to take these funds, but we do have to provide the services for the students. That doesn't go away without the funds.
Okay, any thing final from anyone on this particular topic?
I wanted to go back to, for clarity, as it relates to the 15% set aside for preschool. We, again, don't want to bring it back as a voting item, as an action item in 2 weeks, and not have the board's preference stated or clearly identified in that. And that was the one area that I heard at least some discussion as to whether or not we should do a 15% set aside in the preschool grant. Just want to make sure we don't leave the table and not have had that, and that was in the expectation.
It wouldn't be in the preschool grant, it would be in 611.
611.
Which is under,
The bigger one,
right,
with the set aside.
yeah.
I mean, I just heard the question. I mean, this is kind of like the chicken and egg thing, that
Well, yeah,
if the overarching strategy was saying that was something that we needed to be giving focused attention, then I would be looking at this and say, well, why aren't we giving it attention? But at least for me, in the absence of that, I'm kind of.
Right, I just want to be clear
well,
that,
it's-
It's not saying that if the funds are needed, we're withholding the funds. It's just saying that we're not earmarking the funds for that at this point in time. That's how I understood.
right, and
The
the state is
explanation.
not requiring
requirement.
us
I
to
will,
with those funds.
send you the letter from John Asenberg.
well,
Email.
it says here, no, we're good, we don't need the letter from that. It says, the question on page 10 is for 611, is your school division required to set aside 15% or voluntarily setting aside Part B funds, which is the 619, for coordinated early intervening services? And our answer was no, both because we aren't required, and again, we aren't stepping away from our commitment to early intervention as part of the various entities that we participate with in early intervention. But at this point, we haven't set aside. So that's what I'm trying to be clear. What's
Right.
the board's
Well-
preference?
Yeah, and I had asked that question because I'm not clear, even though we're not required to have it, I'm not clear on whether we should be proactive in having that because of the positive outcomes that can occur. And not to mention, there are savings down the line that could potentially occur with enhanced early intervention services, so.
Right, and that's why I
And-
brought it back up, because
Yeah.
Well, see, I just,
clear.
I'm at a
But I
disadvantage
still
'cause-
don't have that information on whether you all would think, I'm asking you the question.
well,
Do you-
let me ask it this way, ask Dr. James
Yeah.
Mitchell. When we did we set aside for this current year any early intervention?
No, I always rely on my email from John Asenberg to tell us if we need to. And as I stated previously, they look at race, suspensions, those types of things to determine what we need to focus on.
But this is, yeah.
This is the early
Okay, I'm-
right, this is the early intervention set aside. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to find out if we, in the current grant, have
Oh,
any set aside.
For 619, no ma'am, we don't have to.
No. I
619?
understand we may not have to. I'm just trying to find out, is not having it for 17, 18 a new action, or is that consistent with what the current grant looks like?
It's consistent with
Okay.
the previous.
So
grant.
we have not set aside for at least this current year, and not anticipating setting aside going forward. And so,
But do you see us setting aside those funds to enhance our early intervention services that would benefit our students in the long run? I mean,
I think the set aside amount would be 10,000, is that, it shows 0 on the document, on page 10, I believe it is.
I think that would have to be something that Ms. Rhonda and I would have to sit down and figure out.
So,
Need clarity on this.
so you all are talking, for those that don't have the level of expertise as others, looking to you all to make a recommendation to us in terms of the pros and cons of what's being presented. So right now, we've been presented with something without a
Okay.
set aside. If the board is going to say that we think that there's some value in considering a set aside, you would have to give us some,
And we will provide that to the board
Basis.
appropriately as to our recommendation based on the question.
Okay. That,
so we'll revisit
back to that.
in a couple of weeks. But again, you all are the ones that are experts bringing that to us. You have to, we're just asking basically what's the pros and cons of what we currently
Right,
have, and if we
and-
were to do something different.
We will give the board some updated information in advance of
Okay.
the next meeting.